rusted hinges groaned in protest as Sarah Monroe pushed the heavy oak door open, the sound swallowed by the unnerving quiet of the house on Hemlock Lane. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon light, filtering through the grimy window panes, illuminating a space that felt suspended in time. It was larger than she'd pictured from the online listing. The high ceilings, the room sprawling away from the central entryway in a way that felt grand and vaguely labyrinthine. An old grandfather clock stood silently near the staircase, its pendulum still, its face obscured by shadow. The air was cool and carried the faint, layered sense of old wood, damp plaster, and something else, something indefinably melancholic, like decades of unspoken sighs had settled into the very fabric of the building. This was it, her self-imposed exile, the place she had run to when the city lights felt like accusations, and every siren seemed to echo the night the fire took everything. She stepped inside, pulling her suitcase behind her, the wheels rumbling briefly on the worn floorboards before sinking slightly into an aged floral rug. The door clicked shut behind her with a soft finality, amplifying the silence. Loneliness wasn't just a possibility here, it was a palpable presence. She'd sought isolation, a buffer zone between her raw grief and the well-meaning but ultimately suffocating pity of friends. The probing questions of insurance adjusters, the lingering scent of smoke that seemed to follow her everywhere. Here, surrounded by acres of dense woods, miles from the nearest town, perhaps the constant replay of flames, of heat, of the desperate grip slipping away, would finally quiet. The memory surged, sharp and unwelcome, tightening her chest. She pushed it down, focusing on the practicalities. Keys on the small, dusty table by the door. A quick walkthrough to check the basics. Water running rust-colored at first. Lights flickering uncertainly in some rooms. The ancient boiler in the basement emitting a low rumble. It was a house with history, with quirks, maybe even with scars of its own. Unpacking felt like an archaeological dig through the remnants of a life that no longer felt entirely hers. Clothes smelling faintly of storage. Books she couldn't remember buying. Photographs that brought a fresh wave of pain. She set a framed picture of her parents on the mantelpiece in the living room, their smiling faces a stark contrast to the room's somber atmosphere. Days melted into a monotonous rhythm. Wake, coffee, unpack a box or two, wander the echoing rooms, stare out at the encroaching trees, sleep fitfully, repeat. The quiet she had craved began to feel oppressive, the solitude morphing from sanctuary into something closer to a cage. She found herself listening intently to the house's natural sounds, the creak of settling timbers, the sigh of wind through the eaves, half expecting, half dreading something more. The sheer lack of human interaction was startling. No distant traffic hum, no neighbors walking dogs, just the rustle of leaves and the occasional cry of a bird. One evening, nursing a cup of tea that had gone cold, the weight of the silence felt particularly heavy. The sun had set, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, but the darkness pooling inside the house felt older, deeper. She scrolled idly through her phone, a lifeline to a world that felt increasingly remote. Social media felt hollow, news headlines overwhelming. She drifted through the App Store, searching for anything, a game, a distraction. That's when she saw it, EchoLink. The icon was simple, a stylized sound wave in calming blues and greens. Connect with friends, old and new, the tagline read. Rediscover community, share your voice. It sounded innocuous, maybe even helpful. Perhaps a low-stakes chat, a connection with someone anonymous, someone who didn't know her history, would be easier than reaching out to people from her past. Hesitantly, she tapped download. The progress bar filled slowly, and the weak rural internet signal struggled. Finally, it installed. She created a basic profile, using only her first name and a generic avatar, a silhouette against a sunset. She typed a tentative, "Hello?" into the main chat feed, feeling foolish, exposed, unsure what she even hoped for. A digital voice in the wilderness, a simple acknowledgement. Anything to break the crushing silence of the house on Hemlock Lane. Sarah's tentative hello hung in the digital ether of the EchoLink chat feed, a tiny flare sent up from her island of solitude. For several long minutes, nothing happened. She watched other messages scroll past, brief, impersonal exchanges between strangers discussing trivialities, the weather in unseen cities, the plots of television shows she hadn't watched, complaints about commutes she no longer made. It felt strangely voyeuristic, highlighting her disconnection. A pang of self-consciousness hit her. What had she expected? Instant community? A magical cure for loneliness? It was just an app. She received the standard automated welcome messages, clinically cheerful guides to features she doubted she'd ever use, outlining community guidelines about respectful interaction that already felt ironic. A couple of random connection requests appeared, profiles bearing blurry, unidentifiable photos or usernames like SparklePony87 and XX Nighthawk XX. She declined them quickly, a familiar sense of caution surfacing. This whole idea felt increasingly naive, potentially foolish. Maybe she should just delete it. The brief spark of hope she'd felt upon downloading it guttered, threatening to extinguish into the pervasive gloom of the house. Just as she reached to close the app, her phone emitted a soft, distinct chime, different from her usual notification sounds. A direct message. Her pulse gave a slight jump. Against her better judgment, curiosity won out. She tapped the notification. The sender's profile was blank, the default gray silhouette staring back, the username an anonymous jumble. Use 734 billion reals, 9x. The message itself consisted of 2 stark words. They're watching. Sarah read it, then read it again. A frown tightened her brow. It was bizarre, certainly. Unsettling? A little. But the internet was full of strange comments and attempts at provocation. Probably a bot scraping new profiles, or some bored teenager trying to be cryptic. It was too generic to feel truly personal. Still, she couldn't stop a quick, instinctive glance towards the nearest window, where dusk was gathering, deepening the shadows beneath the trees. Annoyance overriding the faint flicker of unease, she navigated to the user's minimal profile and firmly tapped the block button. A small confirmation popped up. Use 734 billion reals, 9x blocked. Simple, efficient, a minor nuisance dealt with. She put the phone down on the armrest, the screen going dark, and tried to dismiss the incident, telling herself it meant nothing. She went to the kitchen to make tea, the ritual familiar and grounding, but the silence of the house seemed to have acquired a subtle, listening quality it hadn't possessed before. Hours passed. Sarah attempted to read, but the words swam on the page, her concentration fractured. The house settled around her with its usual repertoire of creaks and groans, sounds she was slowly learning. But tonight, they seemed sharper, less benign. Was that footstep upstairs just the old wood contracting, or something else? Was the faint sighing sound the wind outside, or something nearer? She found herself holding her breath, straining to listen. The isolation, which she had initially embraced, now felt like a vulnerability, leaving her exposed. Her phone buzzed again on the armrest, the sound making her jump. Another EchoLink notification. Hesitation warred with a compulsive need to know. She picked it up. A different anonymous user. Observer X1. The message. Did you think you could hide? This time, the chill was immediate, undeniable. It wasn't generic. It felt aimed directly at her, probing the very reason she was in this remote house. Hide? Hide from what? The aftermath of the fire? The pitying glances? Her own crushing guilt? Or was it implying something else? Something she couldn't comprehend? Who could possibly know she felt like she was hiding? Panic fluttered in her chest. This felt coordinated, targeted. Was someone tracking her? Had she been careless online, left some digital breadcrumb trail leading to Hemlock Lane? Her mind raced through possibilities, each more alarming than the last. With trembling fingers, she blocked Observer X1, the confirmation message feeling less reassuring this time. She got up and walked through the downstairs rooms, checking the lock on the front door, then the back. She peered through the windows, her gaze sweeping the dark tree line, searching for any sign of movement, any reflection that didn't belong. She saw nothing but the impenetrable darkness of the rural night. The house felt vast and empty, yet somehow, terrifyingly, occupied. Sleep offered no escape. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring up at the ceiling. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside, magnified by the silence and her mounting anxiety. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were chaotic and disturbing, filled with smoke, shadows, and the feeling of being pursued. She woke abruptly hours later, heart pounding, tangled in her sheets, the acrid, phantom scent of smoke sharp in her nostrils, a sensory hallucination born of trauma. It always came when her defenses were lowest, Reaching for her phone was almost involuntary, a desperate check for she wasn't sure what. Reassurance? Distraction? Proof she wasn't completely losing her mind? The screen illuminated the dark room, displaying a new message notification. The sender was Whisperwind. The message read, "The quiet screams, doesn't it?" Sarah felt a tremor run through her. It was less direct than the previous messages, but somehow more insidious, tapping into the oppressive silence she had sought and now feared. She tried to block Whisperwind, but this time, the app seemed to glitch. The block button grayed out momentarily, then returned to normal, but no confirmation message appeared. She tried again. Nothing. A flicker of digital resistance. Unease turned into genuine fear. She forced herself to put the phone down, tried deep breathing exercises, told herself it was stress, grief, the isolation playing tricks on her mind. But the feeling of being watched, of being known, persisted. A few minutes later, the phone chimed again, insistent, demanding. Her hand shook as she reached for it. The sender was Echo of Sins. Her breath hitched before she even focused on the text. Then she read it, the words burning themselves onto her consciousness. "The smoke still clings to you." A strangled gasp escaped her lips. Time seemed to stop. This wasn't an interpretation. This wasn't ambiguous. This was a direct reference to the fire, to the specific sensory detail that haunted her most profoundly. The smell she sometimes imagined still lingered on her skin, in her hair, a constant reminder of her perceived failure. It was impossible, utterly, terrifyingly impossible. No one on this app could know that. It wasn't in her profile. It wasn't anywhere online. It was locked deep inside her. Panic, cold and absolute, washed over her. She scrambled to block Echo of Sins, her fingers fumbling on the screen. The block user option appeared, and she tapped it frantically. An error message flashed, stark white text on a black background. Action failed. User cannot be blocked. She tried again and again, stabbing at the screen with increasing desperation. The same error message appeared each time. She navigated frantically through the app's menus, searching for a report user function, a contact support link. The interface seemed deliberately confusing, options leading to dead ends or generic FAQs that offered no help. It felt like the app itself was preventing her, protecting its messenger. She threw the phone away from her, onto the floor at the foot of the bed, where it landed with a soft thud on the rug. The screen remained lit, the message from Echo of Sins glowing malevolently in the darkness. It felt like a physical violation, an intrusion into the deepest, most guarded part of her mind. The house on Hemlock Lane, her intended sanctuary, suddenly felt like the most dangerous place in the world. And the threat wasn't just outside the walls. It was inside, held in the palm of her hand, radiating from the small glowing screen on the floor. The breach was complete. The phone lay discarded on the rug, its screen dark now, but the imprint of the message from Echo of Sins felt burned onto Sarah's retinas. Sleep was a forgotten luxury. As the first weak rays of dawn painted the dusty windows gray, she moved through the house with the hesitant steps of an intruder in her own home. The silence was immense, a stark contrast to the city's constant hum she had fled. But it was no longer peaceful. It felt thin, stretched, taut over something else, something waiting. She made coffee by rote, the aroma failing to cut through the knot of anxiety in her stomach. She stood by the kitchen window, staring out at the dense, unmoving trees, feeling trapped between the unsettling digital world on her phone and the unnerving physical reality of the house. It began subtly, almost deniably. A faint susurrus, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, seemed to emanate from the corners of rooms, always just at the edge of her hearing. She'd pause, straining to listen, only for the sound to vanish, leaving just the low thrum of the refrigerator or the sigh of the wind outside. Then, one afternoon, while standing in the echoing entryway, she heard it clearly, or thought she did, a single, sibilant whisper that sounded chillingly like her name, Sarah. She spun around, heart leaping into her throat, scanning the empty space, the shadowed staircase, the closed doors leading off the hall. Nothing. Just the dust motes dancing in the light, the silent grandfather clock. Was it the house settling, air currents, or was her grief manifesting in auditory hallucinations? The uncertainty gnawed at her, blurring the line between external threat and internal collapse. The whispers continued intermittently, never loud, never clear enough to be certain, sometimes sounding like fragments of conversation, other times like wordless, breathy sighs that seemed to pass right beside her ear, raising the hairs on her arms. The tapping started a day later. At first, it was a light, almost hesitant tick, 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 tick against the window pane in the spare bedroom upstairs, a room filled with unpacked boxes and shrouded furniture. Sarah assumed it was a branch, blown by the wind. Though the day was still, she went upstairs to check, peering out through the grimy glass. The nearest branches were several feet away, unmoving. As she stood there, the tapping stopped. Later that evening, while trying to read in the living room, it began again, this time seemingly from inside the wall near the fireplace, a faster, more insistent rhythm, like tiny, impatient fingers drumming. Tap, 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 tap. She pressed her ear against the cool plaster, listening intently. Silence. She pulled back, frustrated, scanning the room. The sound started again, this time from the direction of the hallway door. It seemed to move, deliberately elusive, a game of auditory hide-and-seek designed to unravel her nerves. Sometimes it was frantic, like a trapped bird beating against glass. Other times slow and deliberate. Tap, 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 each sound falling into the silence like a drop of water in a deep well. She checked pipes, radiators, and window frames, searching for any rational source, finding none. The physical environment of the house also began to feel subtly wrong. Cold spots became more frequent, more pronounced. She'd be walking down the upstairs corridor and suddenly pass through a zone of intense, unnatural cold that stole her breath and made her skin prickle sharply. It wasn't just a draft. It felt like a tangible presence, icy and invasive, clinging for a moment before releasing her back into the normal air. One evening, sitting on the sofa, a wave of frigid air washed over her, so cold it made her gasp and pull her cardigan tighter, despite the room being otherwise warm. It felt as if something unseen had passed right through her. She found herself avoiding certain areas, mapping the house by these invisible cold zones. Other small anomalies accumulated. Cupboard doors in the kitchen, which she distinctly remembered closing firmly, would be found slightly ajar. A faint scraping sound from the attic above her bedroom one night had her sitting bolt upright in bed, straining to hear until it faded away, leaving her in the dark with her pounding heart. Investigating the next morning revealed nothing but dust and stored junk. And then there was the book. She had been trying to read it in the living room, seeking distraction. She remembered setting it down, spine up, on the small table beside the armchair. Later, needing something from the kitchen, she returned to find the book lying face down on the floor near the hearth, a good 10 feet away. Its pages were slightly ruffled. Had she brushed past it carelessly? Had it slid off the polished surface of the table? She tried to reconstruct her movements, searching for a logical explanation. It was possible, she conceded. Stress and exhaustion were making her clumsy, forgetful. But the accumulation of these small, unsettling events, layered on top of the whispers, the tapping, and the deeply disturbing messages from EchoLink, created a pervasive sense of unease. She knelt on the worn floorboards, the cool wood a stark contrast to the sudden heat prickling her skin. Her fingers closed around the spine of the fallen book, the familiar texture of the slightly frayed paperback cover doing little to ground her. A tremor started in her hand, faint but persistent, a physical manifestation of the chaos swirling within her. She tightened her grip, willing the shaking to stop, feeling the muscles in her forearm tense with the effort. Slowly, she rose, clutching the book like a shield. Her gaze swept the room, deliberately avoiding the corners, the places where the afternoon light failed to penetrate fully. But even in her peripheral vision, the shadows seemed wrong. They weren't just patches of dimness. They pooled like ink spills, possessing a depth, a substance that felt unnatural. They seemed to cling to the walls, stretching subtly when her attention was elsewhere, contracting slightly when she risked a sideways glance. Did the air near them feel colder? Did they absorb sound, contributing to the room's heavy stillness? She couldn't be sure, and the not knowing, the constant questioning of her senses, was part of the torment. Looking directly at them felt like acknowledging a presence she desperately wanted to deny, a presence that felt ancient, patient, and deeply malevolent. The entire house felt different now, irrevocably changed. From the neutral, if lonely structure she had first entered, it was no longer just wood, plaster, and glass. It felt attentive. The silence wasn't empty. It was listening, waiting. The way the floorboards occasionally creaked under her weight sounded less like settling and more like a response to her movement. The faint drafts that snaked through the rooms felt like cold breaths on her skin. It was the feeling of being intensely observed, not by eyes she could see, but by the house itself, by every wall, every window, every darkened doorway. This awareness wasn't just a fleeting prickle on her neck anymore. It had become a tangible pressure, a heavy cloak of apprehension settling over her shoulders, making it harder to breathe normally. It was a constant, low-frequency hum of anxiety, vibrating just beneath the surface of her thoughts, interfering with her concentration, making her jump at the slightest unexpected sound. Her jaw ached from being perpetually clenched, her muscles tight with a readiness for flight or fight that had no clear target. This place, chosen as a refuge, a space to heal, was insidiously transforming into something else entirely. It was becoming a prison, not one with locked doors and barred windows, but one constructed from invisible, far more effective materials. The bars were forged from her own escalating fear, the corrosive doubt that whispered she might be imagining everything, and the bone-deep, chilling possibility that she was fundamentally, terrifyingly mistaken about being alone. The entity from the chat app, the one that knew her trauma, felt like it was no longer confined to the glowing screen of her phone. The boundary between the digital violation and the physical disturbances in the house had become porous, indistinct. The cold spots felt like the icy anonymity of the messages. The whispers in the air echoed the sibilant threats from Echo of Sins. The manipulation of objects, like the fallen book, felt like the same unseen hand that prevented her from blocking the user. It was as if the static itself, the digital noise carrying those hateful words, was leaking out, infecting the very atmosphere around her, twisting her sanctuary into a stage for its escalating torment. The air felt thick with its potential, charged and waiting. Days blurred into a sleepless, anxiety-ridden haze. Sarah moved through the large, quiet house like a wraith, shadows deepening under her eyes, her appetite gone. The constant low-level hum of fear had become her baseline state. The whispers seemed more frequent now, slithering at the edges of her awareness, sometimes coalescing into sounds that were almost words, almost her name, before dissolving back into ambiguity. The cold spots lingered, shifting unpredictably, icy patches in the fabric of the house's atmosphere. The tapping continued its unnerving rhythm, sometimes frantic against a window pane, sometimes slow and deliberate from within a wall, a constant, nerve-shredding reminder of the unseen presence. Her attempts at rationalization grew weaker with each passing hour, each inexplicable event. The house itself felt complicit, its silence no longer empty but watchful, its shadows no longer passive but potentially concealing. She found herself performing small, almost ritualistic checks, locking doors she knew were already locked, peering into closets before entering rooms, avoiding looking into mirrors for too long. Her phone remained a source of profound dread. She kept EchoLink closed, notifications silenced, yet the mere presence of the device felt toxic. Occasionally, driven by a morbid compulsion, she would open the app, quickly scanning for new messages before closing it again. One evening, steeling herself, she checked. A new message waited from an unfamiliar username, Silent Witnesses. It contained only 4 words. No one believes liars. The accusation struck deep, twisting her existing fear of not being believed into something sharper, more personal. Was it calling her a liar about the fire? Or was it warning her that any attempt to seek help would be futile? The ambiguity was suffocating. She slammed the phone face down on the table, a choked sob escaping her lips. That message became a tipping point. The accumulated weight of the messages, the whispers, the tapping, the cold, the feeling of being constantly watched and subtly manipulated, all crashed down on her. The isolation, once sought, was now unbearable. She couldn't do this alone. The thought of spending another night in this house, with its listening silence and creeping phenomena, filled her with a primal terror. She needed help. She needed someone from the outside, someone real, someone who knew her before the fire, before Hemlock Lane. Her thoughts immediately went to Mia. Mia, her college roommate, is pragmatic, level-headed, sometimes brutally honest, but fiercely loyal. Mia, who had seen her through bad breakups and academic crises, who had held her hand at her parents' funerals years ago, Hesitation gripped her. Calling Mia meant admitting the extent of her fear, risking judgment, risking the dreaded diagnosis of stress, grief, or worse. How could she explain whispers that vanished, cold spots that couldn't be measured, messages from an app that seemed to know her soul? It sounded like the plot of a cheap horror movie or the ramblings of someone losing their grip on reality. She imagined Mia's concerned frown, the gentle suggestions to see a doctor, the well-meaning attempts to rationalize the irrational. But the alternative, facing whatever was happening in this house alone, was infinitely worse. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she picked up her phone, her fingers trembling as she navigated to her contacts and found Mia's number. She pressed call, holding the phone to her ear, her heart pounding against her ribs. It rang 3 times before Mia picked up, her voice warm and familiar, instantly transporting Sarah back to a time before smoke and shadows. "Sarah, hey, I was just thinking about you. How are you settling into the new place? Is the country life agreeing with you?" Mia's cheerfulness felt like it belonged to another universe. Sarah struggled to find her voice, swallowing past the lump in her throat. "Mia," she began, her voice thin, unsteady. I need help." The forced brightness instantly vanished from Mia's tone, replaced by concern. "Sarah, what's wrong? You sound awful. Is everything okay?" Trying to keep her voice even, Sarah attempted to explain. She started with the house, the isolation, then moved hesitantly to the EchoLink app, the strange messages. She described the whispers, the tapping, the cold, the book falling, trying to present it factually, fighting the urge to dissolve into panicked tears. She recounted the message about the smoke, the one that felt impossible. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sarah could almost hear Mia processing, searching for a logical framework. "Okay, Sarah, slow down," Mia said finally, her voice gentle but laced with a careful skepticism Sarah had anticipated. "This sounds intense. Are you sure you're okay? You've been under unbelievable stress, honey. Grief can do strange things, make you hyper-aware, make you imagine things. And old houses make weird noises. Maybe the app thing is just some elaborate, cruel prank?" "No, Mia, it's not just noises, it's not just stress," Sarah insisted, desperation making her voice rise. "The messages knew things nobody could know, and the feeling here, it's real. I'm scared, Mia. I'm really, truly scared. I don't feel safe here." She described the feeling of being watched, the way the house itself felt wrong, the incident with the book, trying to convey the cumulative effect, the certainty that had replaced her initial doubt. She could hear Mia sigh softly. "Okay," Mia said, her voice losing most of its skepticism, replaced now by genuine worry for her friend's state of mind, regardless of the cause. "Okay, I hear you. You sound terrified. Look, I can't just leave you out there like this." Relief washed over Sarah, so potent it almost buckled her knees. "Can you come?" Sarah whispered. "Please?" "Yes," Mia said firmly. "Yes, I'll come. I can drive down tomorrow afternoon. I'll leave after lunch, should be there by late afternoon, okay? We'll figure this out. Together." "Thank you," Sarah breathed, the words catching on a sob. Tears, hot and stinging, finally broke free, tracing paths through the grime of exhaustion on her cheeks. It was a release, a cracking of the dam that had held back days of mounting terror. "Thank you, Mia." Her voice was thick with emotion, gratitude warring with the residual fear that still vibrated through her. They spoke for a few more minutes, Mia's voice, now stripped of skepticism and filled with practical concern, asking for the exact address, confirming landmarks, discussing arrival times. Sarah answered numbly, focusing all her remaining energy on sounding calmer than she felt, on keeping the raw panic from bleeding back into her tone. She didn't want to give Mia any more reason to doubt the necessity of this visit. The moment the call disconnected, the silence of the house rushed back in, immense and heavy. Sarah's legs felt weak, unsteady. She sank onto the nearest kitchen chair, the hardwood pressing against her spine. Her hand still clutched the phone tightly, the smooth plastic cool against her damp palm. It felt like both the source of her torment and the instrument of her potential salvation, a paradoxical weight in her lap. For the first time in days, a genuine, albeit fragile, tendril of hope unfurled within the suffocating darkness of her fear. It felt like a single candle lit in a vast, cavernous room, a small point of light pushing back against the oppressive gloom. Mia was coming. Someone from the outside, someone grounded in the reality Sarah felt slipping away from her, was on her way. Help was coming. The thought was an anchor in the swirling chaos of her mind. But almost immediately, riding the coattails of that relief, a new, insidious anxiety began to stir, cold and sharp. What if Mia arrived tomorrow and nothing happened? What if the house fell silent, the whispers ceased, the tapping stopped? What if the cold spots dissipated and the rooms felt just like ordinary, empty spaces in a slightly neglected country house? The image formed vividly in her mind. Mia arriving, full of concern, only to find Sarah pale and trembling amidst perfect normalcy. Mia, trying to be kind, suggested rest, maybe medication. Her eyes filled with pitying worry rather than shared fear. Sarah would look like the very thing she dreaded becoming, unstable, paranoid, haunted only by her grief. The entity, the presence, whatever it was that communicated through EchoLink and manifested in the house, felt intelligent. Its cruelty wasn't random, it was targeted, precise. It knew her deepest fears, her specific traumas. It had played with her, revealing itself subtly at first, then more directly, always seemingly aware of her reactions. Would such a calculating presence put on a show for a visitor? Or would it be cleverer than that? Would it deliberately withdraw, feign normalcy, using the quiet to isolate Sarah further and make her doubt her sanity even more profoundly? The thought was terrifying. It suggested a level of manipulative awareness that elevated the threat beyond mere haunting into something deeply personal and strategic. It wouldn't just torment her, it would discredit her, ensuring no one would believe her, leaving her utterly alone with it. The wait until tomorrow afternoon, which had seemed like a beacon just moments before, now stretched before her like an eternity, a vast, uncertain landscape of fear. Every creak of the house, every shadow, every moment of silence would be scrutinized, questioned, and potentially misinterpreted as she waited for Mia, hoping for validation, dreading the possibility of a calculated, deceptive calm. The hours following the call with Mia stretched into an agonizingly slow crawl. Night deepened outside, pressing against the windows, while inside, Sarah felt trapped in a state of hyper-awareness. Every nerve ending seemed frayed, exposed. The house, which had felt actively malevolent before the call, now seemed to adopt a different tactic, a tense, watchful stillness that was almost worse. The overt phenomena subsided, replaced by a subtle, unnerving ambiguity that fed directly into her fear of Mia finding nothing amiss. Was the silence genuine, or was the entity merely holding its breath, waiting? She wandered the rooms restlessly, unable to settle. Sleep was unthinkable. She brewed more coffee, the caffeine adding a jittery edge to her exhaustion. Every sound was magnified, scrutinized. The groan of the refrigerator cycling on, the distant hoot of an owl, the creak of a floorboard upstairs. Each noise made her jump, her head snapping towards the source, expecting something. She couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, but it was less overt now, more like a hidden watcher patiently biding its time. Once, she thought she saw the door to the cellar drift open slightly in her peripheral vision, just a crack. When she turned to look directly, it was closed tightly. Had she imagined it? Or had it moved, then quickly corrected itself? Another time, passing the foot of the main staircase, a fleeting wave of intense cold washed over her ankles, making her gasp, but it vanished as quickly as it came, leaving no trace. Were these real occurrences, or just her overactive imagination, primed by fear and lack of sleep? She tried to distract herself. She picked up the book she'd found on the floor earlier, forcing herself to read the words, but they wouldn't cohere into meaning. Her mind kept drifting back to the EchoLink messages, to the whispers, to the terrifying possibility that Mia would arrive and see only a stressed, grieving friend in a creaky old house. She considered tidying up, making the place seem less chaotic, but the effort felt monumental, pointless. What difference would it make if the source of her terror was invisible, perhaps even imaginary? She found herself caught in a terrible internal conflict. Part of her desperately wanted Mia to witness something undeniable, something that would validate her fear, prove she wasn't losing her mind. Yet, another part dreaded the thought of exposing Mia to whatever lurked here, terrified of what might happen if the entity decided to reveal itself fully. The night passed in a series of tense vigils, punctuated by brief, unsatisfying dozes in an armchair, from which she would jerk awake at the slightest sound, her heart pounding. Dawn arrived gray and unwelcoming. The day dragged on interminably. Sarah paced, checked her phone compulsively. No new messages, thankfully, though the silence felt ominous, and peered out the windows countless times, scanning the empty driveway, the silent woods. The ambiguity continued. A faint tapping sound might start from upstairs, only to cease the moment she moved towards it. A shadow in the corner of her eye would seem to stretch, only to resolve into a perfectly normal shape when she looked directly. It felt like a deliberate campaign of psychological warfare, designed to keep her perpetually off balance, doubting her own perceptions. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, casting long, distorted shadows across the overgrown lawn, Sarah's anxiety tightened into a physical knot in her stomach. The time frame Mia had given approached, and with each passing minute, the tension inside the house seemed to escalate, mirroring her own internal state. She abandoned her restless pacing and took up a position near the large window in the living room, the one that offered the clearest view down the winding, unpaved driveway. Her fingers nervously pleated the edge of the heavy, dust-laden curtain as she peered out. Her body held rigid. The silence pressed in, no longer ambiguous but thick with anticipation, as if the house itself was holding its breath alongside her. Every sound, no matter how small or distant, snagged her attention, amplified by her frayed nerves. The drone of a small plane, passing high overhead, made her flinch. A sudden gust of wind rattling the window pane caused her heart to jump into her throat. The sharp cry of a jay from the woods nearby sounded like a warning. Each noise was a potential harbinger, either of Mia's arrival or of some new manifestation from the entity she feared. Hope and dread tangled within her, making it difficult to breathe evenly. She imagined Mia pulling up, seeing her like this. Pale face, dark circles under her eyes, hands trembling slightly, clothes rumpled from a sleepless night spent mostly in an armchair. Would Mia see a friend in desperate need of help, or would she see confirmation of a psychological collapse? The fear that her appearance alone would solidify Mia's skepticism was a cold counterpoint to the desperate hope that Mia would somehow see the truth, feel the wrongness of the place, believe her. The minutes stretched, each one feeling like an hour. Her gaze drifted towards the silent grandfather clock standing in the shadows of the entryway. She had noted its stillness upon arrival, another piece of the house's suspended animation. But now, her eyes widened slightly. The long, brass pendulum was moving. It swung back and forth with a slow, deliberate, perfectly even rhythm, hypnotic in its motion. Yet, the clock remained utterly silent. There was no accompanying tick-tock, no resonant chime marking the hour. It moved with a ghostly quietness that was profoundly unsettling. When had it started? She hadn't heard it being wound, hadn't heard the characteristic chime that should have announced its reawakening. It was simply working. Another inexplicable detail, a quiet manipulation of the environment occurring right under her nose, adding another layer to the tapestry of wrongness that enveloped the house. It felt like a subtle display, a quiet flex of control just before the visitor arrived. Mesmerized and disturbed by the clock's silent movement, she almost missed it. A flicker of movement at the far end of the driveway, where it met the barely visible country road. Her breath caught. She leaned closer to the window pane, straining her eyes. Was it just the wind moving the trees, creating a trick of the light? There it was again, clearer this time. The distinct shape of a car kicking up a small plume of dust as it turned onto the lane. Sunlight glinted off the windshield. It was Mia's car. Relief surged through her, so potent it made her feel lightheaded, but it was immediately followed by a fresh wave of anxiety. Mia was here. The confrontation, one way or another, was about to begin. Would the house behave, or would it reveal its true nature? She didn't know which outcome she feared more. Sarah practically flew to the front door, her hand fumbling for a moment with the stiff latch before pulling it open. She stepped out onto the small, slightly warped wooden porch just as Mia switched off her car's engine, the sudden silence amplifying the remote quiet of the location. Mia emerged from the driver's side, shielding her eyes against the afternoon sun for a moment as she took in the house. Her expression was a mixture of curiosity and concern. She offered Sarah a smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes, which were busy scanning Sarah's appearance, noting the pallor, the shadows beneath her eyes. the tremor Sarah couldn't quite control in her hands. "Hey," Mia said, her voice softer than it had been on the phone, more cautious. She walked towards the porch steps, her gaze sweeping over the house itself. The peeling paint on the window frames, the slightly overgrown look of the surrounding yard, the undeniable air of isolation. "Place looks atmospheric," she commented, clearly searching for a neutral term. "Thank God you're here," Sarah breathed, the words rushing out. She felt an almost overwhelming urge to grab Mia's arm, to pull her inside immediately, to make her see. But she restrained herself, forcing a semblance of normalcy. Come in. Mia climbed the few steps onto the porch, her smile becoming a little more reassuring as she got closer. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she observed gently, reaching out to give Sarah's arm a comforting squeeze. Sarah flinched slightly at the unexpected contact, then mentally cursed herself. Mia's brow furrowed slightly in concern. "Let's get inside. You can tell me everything." Sarah led the way into the entryway. The air inside felt cool, still, and heavy. Mia paused just inside the doorway, her gaze moving around the space, taking in the worn floral rug, the dark wood staircase, the faint scent of dust and old plaster. Her eyes lingered for a moment on the grandfather clock, its pendulum swinging silently, eerily. "Clock works, huh?" Mia remarked, tilting her head slightly. "Didn't hear it chime." "It just started," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't wind it." Mia shot her a quick look, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Skepticism? Pity? Before schooling her features back into an expression of calm concern. "Old houses do weird things, Sarah. Springs unwind, mechanisms catch." She offered the rational explanation gently, as if testing the waters. Sarah didn't reply, just led the way into the living room. Mia followed, setting her purse down on a dusty armchair. The room was dim, the curtains still partially drawn. "Okay," Mia said, turning to face Sarah fully. "Talk to me. Tell me what's been happening from the beginning." Sarah took a shaky breath. Now that Mia was actually here, the task of explaining felt even more daunting. Where did she even start? With the impossible messages? The whispers that faded when you tried to hear them? The cold spots that left no trace? "It started with the app," Sarah began, recounting the initial messages, the escalating fear, the specific chilling knowledge displayed by Echo of sins. She described the whispers, the tapping, trying to articulate how deliberate, how unnatural they felt. She pointed towards the hearth where she'd found the book on the floor. "It was over there," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know I left it on the table." Mia listened patiently, her expression serious, attentive. She didn't interrupt, but Sarah could see the internal struggle in her eyes, the effort to reconcile her friend's evident terror with the seemingly normal, if slightly dilapidated, surroundings. The house remained quiet. No whispers curled through the air, no tapping echoed from the walls. The shadows in the corners looked like ordinary shadows. The air felt cool, but perhaps just the normal coolness of an old, shaded house. Sarah felt a rising tide of desperation. It wasn't happening. Mia wasn't seeing it. "And the cold spots," Sarah continued, her hand making a frustrated, vague gesture towards the seemingly empty air between them. How could she point to something that wasn't there? Something that left no trace, but a lingering chill in her bones and a spike of fear. "It's not just a draft, Mia. It's like walking through ice. Right here," she insisted, stepping forward into the space she indicated, then back again, as if demonstrating an invisible boundary. One second, it's normal. The next, it's freezing, so cold you gasp, and then poof. She snapped her fingers, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "It's gone." Just like that. It happens all over the house, randomly. How do you explain that? She searched Mia's face for any flicker of understanding, any sign that this specific physical anomaly registered as truly strange. And the feeling? She pressed on, her voice lowering slightly, becoming more intense. The feeling of being watched. It's not just nerves. It's not like feeling self-conscious. It's constant. It's like eyes are on you, even when you're alone in a room. It's heavy, Mia, like a weight. You feel it on your skin, at the back of your neck. Even now. She glanced nervously towards the shadowed corners of the living room, then back at Mia, her own eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pleading. Her voice cracked on the last words, the control she was trying to maintain, finally fraying, exposing the raw desperation beneath. "You have to believe me." The plea hung in the air, raw and vulnerable, stripped of any pretense. It wasn't just about validating her experience anymore. It was about confirming her sanity, about proving that the terror consuming her wasn't just a figment of her traumatized mind. Mia held her gaze, her expression etched with concern and a deep, troubled sympathy. She didn't look away, didn't dismiss Sarah's words outright. She remained attentive, nodding slightly as Sarah spoke, acknowledging the intensity of her friend's distress. But Sarah could see the subtle calculations behind Mia's eyes, the way her friend was likely processing this information through a filter of logic and concern for Sarah's mental well-being. The cold spots could be psychosomatic, triggered by anxiety, the feeling of being watched, a common symptom of heightened stress or paranoia, especially given Sarah's recent trauma and profound isolation. Mia's rational mind was clearly searching for explanations that didn't involve the supernatural, explanations rooted in Sarah's fragile state. The silence of the room, the lack of any corroborating evidence, only strengthened that perspective. The gap between Sarah's lived nightmare and Mia's perception of reality felt vast and unbridgeable in that moment. Mia closed the small distance between them, her movements slow, deliberate, telegraphing comfort. She placed her hands gently on Sarah's shoulders, the warmth of her touch intended as a grounding gesture, a physical anchor in the storm of Sarah's fear. "Sarah, I believe that you are terrified," Mia said softly, her voice pitched low and soothing, her gaze steady and earnest, meeting Sarah's directly. The words were chosen with care, each one weighed. She didn't say, "I believe you," or "I believe it's real." She validated the emotion, the undeniable, palpable terror radiating from her friend. "I believe something has happened that has scared you profoundly." Again, the focus was on Sarah's subjective experience. Something happened. Something scared her. It carefully avoided endorsing the specific, potentially supernatural cause Sarah was desperately trying to convey. Mia continued, offering a list of possibilities, ticking off the rational explanations that likely felt far more plausible to her than ghosts in the machine. Whether it's this house, she acknowledged the potential for environmental factors, the unsettling nature of an old, isolated building, or stress. She gently touched upon the undeniable psychological toll of Sarah's recent trauma and grief, or someone messing with you online. She addressed the EchoLink messages, framing them as a cruel but human prank or harassment. Each suggestion was logical, reasonable, and completely failed to encompass the chilling certainty Sarah felt. "We're going to figure it out, okay?" Mia squeezed her shoulders gently. "I'm here now. You're not alone." The reassurance was genuine, born of deep affection and worry. But for Sarah, it landed with a hollow thud, because while Mia's words offered presence, they withheld belief. Sarah could feel the careful boundaries in Mia's language, the subtle refusal to step fully into Sarah's reality. The chasm Sarah had feared opening up felt like it was widening with every carefully chosen, comforting word Mia spoke. It was the terrifying gap between experiencing the inexplicable and trying to convince someone else it was real, especially when the evidence refused to cooperate. The very air in the room seemed thick with unspoken doubt, with Mia's loving concern warring with her inherent skepticism. And the house, its continued silence, felt like a calculated move, a deliberate withholding. The whispers lay silent, the tapping had ceased, the air temperature remained stable. It felt like the entity, the presence, was actively choosing not to reveal itself, understanding perhaps that its absence would be more damaging to Sarah's credibility than any overt display. It was a form of mockery, a silent refutation of Sarah's desperate pleas. It confirmed Sarah's earlier anxiety. The entity was intelligent, manipulative, and it seemed content to let Mia see only a distraught, potentially unstable friend in a quiet, creaky house. Mia's presence, meant to be a shield, was inadvertently highlighting Sarah's isolation, leaving her feeling exposed, invalidated, and terrifyingly alone in her conviction, even with her oldest friend standing right beside her. A silence descended in the living room following Mia's carefully chosen words, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It felt thick, suffocating, charged with an unseen, waiting pressure. For Sarah, it was the silence of utter defeat. A cold, physical weight settled in her stomach, dragging downwards, pulling the fragile remnants of her hope into a dark abyss. Mia's gentle skepticism, wrapped in concern, felt like a final verdict, confirming her deepest fear. She was alone in this, truly alone, even with her friend standing right beside her. Mia's hands remained on her shoulders, the warmth intended as comfort, but the contact felt alienating, emphasizing the vast, unbridgeable gulf between Mia's grounded reality and the nightmare Sarah was living. The house itself seemed complicit in this deception, holding its breath, presenting a facade of unnerving normalcy. The air hung unnaturally still, devoid of even the smallest draft. The shadows pooling in the corners and under furniture seemed deeper, colder than ordinary shadows, possessing a watchful quality, as if poised to move the instant attention was diverted. This quiet stillness wasn't reassuring. It felt predatory, the calculated calm before an inevitable, violent storm. And as Sarah watched Mia's expression shift, she saw her friend begin formulating a logical plan, moving into the familiar territory of practical problem-solving. A fresh wave of dread washed over her. Mia's attempt to impose order felt terrifyingly naive, a fragile human construct about to shatter against the unseen. Irrational horror that Sarah knew was lurking just beneath the surface of the house's deceptive quiet. "Okay," Mia said, finally dropping her hands and taking a small step back, her tone becoming more brisk. "First things first, you need sleep. And food. You look like you're running on empty. Maybe we should get out of here for a bit? Go into town, grab dinner, and clear your head? We can come back later. Maybe we can look at that app together and see if we can figure out who's sending those messages." She glanced around the room again, her expression suggesting that a change of scenery was the most logical first step in dealing with Sarah's perceived crisis. Sarah opened her mouth, a surge of desperate protest rising in her throat. The words "no, leaving won't fix it" were forming, ready to spill out, fueled by the frustration of being misunderstood, the urgent need to make Mia grasp that the threat wasn't something they could simply walk away from, that it wasn't confined to her phone screen or the landscape of her own stressed mind. It was here, woven into the house's fabric, watching them even now. But before the first syllable could escape her lips, before she could articulate the futility of Mia's well-intentioned, logical plan, a sound sliced through the heavy stillness of the room, arresting them both mid-thought, mid-breath. It wasn't loud, not initially. It began as a low, insidious rustle, like dry leaves skittering across old floorboards, or perhaps brittle paper being crumpled by unseen hands. The sound seemed to originate from the dim corner behind the overstuffed armchair where Mia had casually tossed her purse upon entering a mundane spot, suddenly rendered sinister. It was a dry, sibilant whisper, devoid of moisture or warmth, carrying an undertone of something ancient and brittle. It wasn't the wind. The air in the room remained unnervingly still. It wasn't the house settling. This sound possessed a distinct, almost conversational quality, despite its lack of discernible words at first. The intrusion was so abrupt, so alien to the preceding quiet, that both women froze instantly. Sarah's half-formed protest died on her lips, her jaw slackening slightly. Mia, who had been turning slightly towards the door as she spoke of leaving, stopped dead, her body tensing. The flow of normal human interaction ceased, replaced by a sudden, shared focus on the intrusive sound. Mia's head tilted sharply, a bird-like movement of instinctive listening, her brow furrowing in concentration and nascent confusion. Her gaze locked onto the shadowed corner, searching the dimness for a source, for an explanation that wasn't immediately apparent. "What was that?" she murmured, the question barely audible, directed as much to herself as to Sarah. The casual confidence she had displayed moments before evaporated, replaced by the first flicker of genuine unease, the first crack in the armor of her skepticism as the house finally began to reveal its true, unsettling nature. The whispering grew louder, clearer, losing its indistinct quality. It wasn't just random noise. It sounded like multiple voices, overlapping, sibilant, speaking unintelligibly, but with a distinct, chilling cadence. It seemed to swirl around them, coming not just from the corner, but from the air itself. "Sarah, listen." Here. Fragments seemed to emerge, distorted but recognizable. Mia's eyes widened, her earlier composure evaporating. She looked at Sarah, then back towards the source of the sound, her face paling. "Okay," Mia breathed, her voice barely audible. "I hear that. Before Sarah could even process the chilling whispers swirling around them, before Mia could fully articulate her dawning unease, a new sound erupted, shattering the air. It wasn't the hesitant, almost playful tick-tick tapping Sarah had tried and failed to describe earlier. This was a brutal, percussive assault. The sound was shockingly loud, sharp, and forceful, like someone hammering heavy knuckles against solid, unyielding oak. It wasn't a request for entry, it was a demand, an assertion of presence that vibrated through the very structure of the house. The first volley struck the wall near the entryway, the impact so hard Sarah imagined the plaster cracking beneath the force. Instantly, before the echo could fade, the sound answered itself from directly above them, seeming to emanate from the ceiling itself, as if something heavy paced or struck the floorboards in the room overhead. Then, impossibly, it resonated from beneath their feet, a deep, booming report from the floorboards, vibrating up through the soles of their shoes. It wasn't just one source, it was everywhere at once, a disorienting, terrifying cacophony. It surrounded them, ricocheting off the walls, ceiling, and floor, trapping them in a percussive cage of sound. This wasn't the house settling. This wasn't branches scraping against wood. This was deliberate, rhythmic, and intensely aggressive. Each series of impacts felt like a physical blow, driving the air from Sarah's lungs, confirming her worst fears with violent finality. Mia flinched violently with each deafening report, her body jerking as if struck. Her head whipped around, eyes wide with shock and burgeoning panic, trying desperately to pinpoint the source, only to have it immediately erupt from another direction. The rational explanations she might have clung to moments before were pulverized by the sheer, undeniable force of the assault. This was impossible, hostile, and terrifyingly real. The shift was instantaneous, violating the basic laws of thermodynamics. One moment the air was cool, the next it was brutally cold, plunging degrees in a fraction of a second. It wasn't just a chill, it felt like stepping into a void. A sudden, invasive absence of heat that leached warmth directly from their skin and bones. The cold was so profound, so unnatural, it felt like a physical presence wrapping around them, constricting their chests, making the simple act of drawing breath a painful effort. Both women gasped simultaneously, sharp, ragged intakes of icy air that burned their lungs. Instinctively, they wrapped their arms around themselves, hunching their shoulders. A futile gesture against the penetrating cold that seemed to emanate from the very walls, the floor, the air itself. Their breath exploded from their lips in thick, white plumes, starkly visible in the suddenly dimming room, tangible proof of the impossible temperature drop. At the same moment the cold hit, the lights overhead began to flicker with violent, spastic energy. It wasn't a gentle wavering, but a frantic, unpredictable strobing, accompanied by an angry, erratic buzzing sound from the old fixtures. The room plunged into moments of near-total darkness, punctuated by harsh, blinding flashes of light. These strobing bursts distorted everything, elongating shadows, making furniture seem to jump and shift, creating terrifying optical illusions in their peripheral vision. One moment, the room was starkly illuminated, revealing Mia's pale, terrified face. The next, it was swallowed by shadow, leaving only the lingering afterimages and the chilling sounds. And the whispers, they surged, escalating from indistinct murmurs into a deafening, swirling vortex of sound. It was no longer just fragments. It was a layered chorus of voices, dozens, perhaps hundreds, overlapping, chattering, hissing, crying, Lafinga cacophony of malice and madness that seemed to claw directly at their minds. The sounds pressed in from all sides, unintelligible yet filled with a palpable hatred, seeming to coil and uncoil in the freezing air around them. It felt like standing in the heart of a storm made of pure, disembodied spite. Overwhelmed by the sensory assault, the bone-deep cold, the disorienting lights, the maddening whispers, the relentless tapping, Mia finally broke. Her carefully constructed composure shattered completely, replaced by raw, primal fear. "Sarah, what is?" she choked out, her voice trembling uncontrollably, barely audible above the din. The question hung unfinished, loaded with terror and disbelief. Her eyes, wide and reflecting the strobing lights, darted frantically around the room, searching for an explanation, a threat, an escape. Instinct took over. She took a stumbling, involuntary step backward, away from the center of the room, away from Sarah, her body turning instinctively towards the entryway, towards the front door, the universal symbol of escape, even as the memory of it slamming shut moments before likely echoed in her panicked mind. Her movement was pure reflex, a desperate, animalistic urge to flee the incomprehensible horror that had fully, undeniably manifested around them. Mia's terrified, half-formed question, "Sarah, what is?" was violently choked off, swallowed by a sound so sudden and explosive it felt like a physical blow. A deafening bang erupted from the entryway. Not just a slam, but a detonation of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the old house. It reverberated through the floorboards beneath their feet, up the walls, and seemed to press inwards from all sides, momentarily overwhelming even the swirling whispers and frantic tapping. The window panes in the living room rattled violently in their frames, the glass vibrating with a high-pitched hum, threatening to shatter from the concussive force. Both women cried out simultaneously, sharp, involuntary shrieks of pure shock and terror torn from their throats. It wasn't just the volume, it was the sheer, brutal violence of the sound. This was the heavy, solid oak front door, the main barrier between the house and the outside world, the one Mia herself had closed firmly, reassuringly, upon entering. Sarah had heard it latch then. Now, it had slammed shut with a force far exceeding any natural explanation. No draft could possess such power, no accidental shove could create such an impact. It felt deliberate, malicious, like an invisible giant had kicked it closed with contemptuous strength. The sound was less like a door closing and more like a cannon firing within the confined space of the house, sharp, shocking, and utterly final. And then, cutting through the immediate ringing in their ears left by the explosive bang, came a secondary sound, small but infinitely more terrifying in its implication. The distinct, metallic click of the heavy deadbolt latch, sliding firmly into place within the doorframe. It was a crisp, definitive sound, echoing slightly in the sudden, ringing silence that followed the main impact. That small click was the sound of their escape route being sealed. It was the sound of a cage door locking. It transformed the house from a place of unsettling phenomena into a confirmed prison. There was no ambiguity left, no room for doubt or rationalization. The entity wasn't just playing games with whispers and shadows. It possessed terrifying physical power, and it had just demonstrated its absolute control over their environment, sealing them inside with it. For a long, breathless moment, they remained utterly frozen, locked in place by the sheer concussive shock of the door slamming and the definitive click of the latch. Time seemed to stutter, the frantic energy of the preceding moments collapsing into a pocket of stunned, ringing silence. Their bodies were rigid, postures mirroring each other in startled paralysis, gazes fixed on the solid, unyielding oak door that now stood as an impassable barrier. It seemed to loom in the strobing, unreliable light, radiating a silent, potent menace. Then, as if pulled by an invisible string, their heads whipped around in near-perfect synchrony. Their eyes met across the freezing, shadow-filled room. In that shared gaze, everything changed. Gone, utterly obliterated, was any lingering trace of Mia's gentle skepticism, any hint of rational doubt or concerned pity. It wasn't just absent, it felt violently scoured away, replaced by something raw and primal. Gone was the friend trying to manage a crisis. In her place was someone confronting an impossible, terrifying reality head-on. What Sarah saw reflected in Mia's wide, dilated pupils wasn't just fear. It was the stark, unadulterated terror of encountering the truly monstrous, the dawning horror of realizing the fundamental rules of reality had just been broken. It was disbelief, warring with the undeniable evidence of her senses, a mind scrambling to comprehend the incomprehensible. And Sarah knew, with chilling certainty, that her own eyes reflected that same naked dread back at Mia. In that horrifying moment of mutual recognition, the crushing weight of Sarah's isolated fear lifted, only to be instantly replaced by a far heavier burden, the shared certainty of their nightmare. The validation she had craved arrived not as relief, but as confirmation of a shared doom. The fear was no longer hers alone to bear. It was a tangible entity between them, immediate, palpable, vibrating in the icy air, undeniably real and infinitely more terrifying now that it was acknowledged by both. The playful, elusive nature of the earlier phenomena felt like a distant memory, a cruel prelude, The entity in the house, the presence that whispered lies and manipulated shadows, had finally dropped its mask. It had demonstrated its terrifying power, its control, its malevolent intent. The slamming door wasn't just a display, it was a declaration. They were trapped, the house was sealed. And the chilling, inescapable truth settled upon them with the weight of a tombstone. They were not alone, and whatever was in there with them had just locked the door. The door is locked. The whispers are closing in. Sarah and Mia are trapped, but the nightmare is only beginning.